We were on the very last episode of Season 3 of Tales from the Darkside. We only have one more season to go. Season 4. Tales from the Darkside only got 4 seasons. So this is episode 22, called The Enormous Radio, that harkens back to the Twilight Zone. They're trying to recreate the Twilight Zone. In fact, this is a period piece set in what it seems like the 1930s. They make it very obvious this is before television is born. And Irene and Jim purchase a new radio, and it's a real fancy one. You can get stations from all over, even out of the country. And the premise here is quite good. This radio begins allowing them to hear private conversations that happen to other people in their apartment complex. So they get to hear their neighbors fighting over this radio. Now, I think this episode has one huge flaw, and it's not the usual ones we get from Tales from the Darkside. The acting here is actually quite good. Irene is played by Kristen Estabrook, who was in Desperate Housewives as Martha, Usual Suspects, and Spider-Man 2. And she does quite a good job here. The accents are not overdone. The old-timey dialogue is not, "Oh, milady, what is that quaint object you have?" They don't do that much. And Jim is played by John Rothman, who's known for being Bill in the TV show One Mississippi. No, the problem is not with the acting or the set design, which does a decent job of making it look like it's the 1930s. It's actually in the fact that these conversations that you hear, which you will hear a lot, it's the main plot of the episode, are very difficult to understand what the people are saying. I get it, it's playing from an old radio, but they really overdo the static, and the voices are way too low. I'll show an example of this.
Up and I'll find your garters.
You wouldn't leave apple cores in the ashtray.
For
That's
God's
truly
sake,
strange.
You're like an old woman. Here are your lousy garters. To Coromandel, where the early pumpkins blow.
My God, it's the Sweeney's nurse.
And you can put on subtitles, but even those don't always pick up what people are saying. And I imagine if you were watching this on TV back in the day with even worse audio than the DVD I have, it would be even harder to hear. What exactly are these conversations that the people are having? Seems like one of them is a guy who's beating his wife in an apartment close to them, but she is leaning right next to the radio and you can't really hear it. And for that alone, I can't give it, it's not going to get above a 5. This would be a decent Twilight Zone episode, but I think they would understand that you don't have to make it so staticky. You can make it quote-unquote unrealistic. In fact, I have no idea what radios in 1941 even really sounded like. And most Americans at this point don't know either. You can put a slight cackle and then have the people talk normally so that you can understand the conversations. Because she listens to this radio tons and tons of times throughout this episode, and they show many different couples that are having these fights. And then Irene and Jim themselves end up having a lot of fights, not only over this radio, but over their living situation. Once again, harkening back to the Twilight Zone, it reminded me of something like Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, where these aliens land and then begin turning people's lights on and off and begin driving the population in this town crazy because someone sees someone's lights go off and they go, "Oh." Someone sees someone's lights go on, they go, "Oh, why are your lights on, but my lights are off? I don't understand." Same way here. Irene is very concerned about these conversations she's hearing, especially about the guy beating his wife. And her husband Jim doesn't really seem to care very much, so she begins fighting with him over these conversations that might not even be real, and they shouldn't even be able to be picking up at this time. The radio is obviously some type of ghost that's messing with them and trying to drive them crazy by doing something that would be somewhat innocuous. But if you can't really hear the conversations very well, I think I'm going to give this episode a 4. So Jim and Irene begin fighting, and guess who's listening? They have a radio, their neighbors have a radio. Do you think maybe this fight is being transmitted to other people's apartments? Yes, of course, that's what's happening. And while this episode is predictable, it's done well enough. As I explained before, it's really the fact that these conversations you hear sound like they're engaging. They're also quite realistic as well. They don't go out on some realm and go, "Oh, we're hiding the body in the kitchen. Oh, don't let anyone know we're hiding the body in the kitchen." Jim and Irene end up fighting over money. He thinks she's spending too much money. She then gets mad at him for not caring about this radio and what other people are doing in the apartment. He then brings up things that she did in the past, stealing from her sister. So it's rather relatable things that's happening between this couple. And it stops right there. That's where the episode ends. This is just going to continue and continue. Maybe it'd be better to end it where they're kind of poor and desperate and have to sell off their things, but Incident here is fine as well, but I still think I'm giving this episode a 4 out of 10. If I could hear the voices, it'd probably be a 5, maybe a 6, but I can't hear the voices, so 4 out of 10 is what Enormous Radio is going to get. But Season 3 did take a bit of a downturn. It does seem like this season is probably the best so far, but I'll rank them all at the end. No season is really standing out as being absolutely amazing. They all have their ups and downs, just like the relationship between Jim and Irene. See how I tied that all together? Amazing. Let's look at what the people have to say. Let's look at a good and bad review. This person gave it a 7 out of 10. Okay episode. That's a talking voice that tells everyone's problems and hidden secrets. This TFTD episode is, in my opinion, a pretty good one that tells the story of a couple as it's set in the early 20th century in a time before TV was born. But they don't tell you the date, so everyone's just sort of guessing. And the radio was the only means of communication and entertainment. True. That and playing Go Fish. And this couple seems to have it all as they seem content and happy, and suddenly this radio takes on a voice of its own as it starts to tell about personal problems, and it reveals secrets about people that the couple knows. That's an interesting take. They're saying that the radio, rather than just listening to conversations of people that's already happening, that maybe the radio is either making up these conversations or the radio is saying it themselves. I'm going to guess the gender. And they feel this, in a way, is a neat tool because it can reveal secrets. Only in the end, it starts to turn the tables and reveal secrets and problems about each of them, and that leads to cause problems between them. Now, it's marriage headaches. That's a long sentence. Overall, nothing great, a pretty good episode. And now we got the negative Nellies like me, they give it a 4 out of 10. A one-note idea, an indifferent execution. The Enormous Radio is a Tales from the Darkside episode, which is as ridiculous as its title. Yeah, Enormous Radio doesn't sound very scary. It should be called The Ghost Radio. The Radio from Hell. It's like the Enormous Radio. Does it do anything else? No, it's just big. No. The viewer is taken to a domestic world in the early 20th century when a housewife's wireless begins to pick up the thoughts and the radio begins to pick up the thoughts and conversations between her not pickering neighbors. Is this magical device a blessing or a curse? It's definitely a curse. Viewers will be easily able to guess the result, as this is a fable that Tales from the Darkside like to play out over and over again. The early 20th century setting isn't very realistic or believable. I kind of liked it. Adding some old-fashioned props and wallpaper does not a historical production make. The acting is routine, and as a whole, the story was done much better in the Private Channels episode of the new Twilight Zone. Haven't seen it. Where a kid's magic headphones allowed him to overhear a hijacker planning to take control of the plane he's flying in. Yes, that does sound like a better plot. Kind of a routine plot. The radio hears other people's conversations in the apartment. So we've been running into a lot of Twilight Zone type episodes like this one, couple comedy horror episodes like the last two, but now starting season 4 episode 1, this one's called Beatles, and that's gonna be the next episode we're gonna cover. And this is just a straight horror episode about a guy who gets sarcophagus from ancient Egypt and he's stealing the jewels, and oh come on, you know there's a curse. They love their Egyptian curses, similar to the Tales from the Darkside movie. So check out that one next week. And also check out our playlist for all episodes of Monsters, Fear Itself, Tales from the Darkside, Black Mirror, Cowboy Bebop, and Pet Shop of Horrors. Thanks a lot.